we will need to keep on we would like to keep on that tight schedule. And that during your regional roundtable, I would appreciate it if you could limit your remarks to things that directly are related to transportation, developments related to the actual or possible shutdown of nuclear power plants, and any notable developments or activities in your state or tribe related to COVID response. And I'd just like to add that this is my second meeting as senior co-chair, and I'd like to welcome Mike on as his first meeting as junior co-chair. And now I will let Mitch give the newcomers orientation.
Thank you, Tiffany. And Laura, if you could watch the waiting room while I give this presentation, I'd really appreciate it. Yeah, so this is something that we wanted to do for any newcomers to the committee, especially legislative members, but I think that this content is useful for everybody, even if you've been with the committee for quite a while. I'll go ahead and run through this, hopefully in 10 or so minutes. If you have any questions at the end, please go ahead and let me know. Can everybody see my screen? Great. So the orientation overview of the introduction to the committee will have 3 sections. We'll go over what's what, who's who, and why it matters. First off, what's what? And some of you might have seen this from previous orientations, but please stick with me. So at the bottom, you remember the food pyramid from back in the day before they changed things. So at the lower level is the thing that there's most of, what is being shipped most often and just has the greatest quantity, and that's low-level radioactive waste and mixed low-level radioactive waste. In the middle there is the transuranic waste, and some of my committee members who might be a little more technically knowledgeable in this area than myself can correct me if I get this wrong, but transuranic waste is things that come in contact with the handling of radioactive materials having to do with the development of nuclear weapons, whether that's lab coats, gloves, masks, things like that. And then at the top is the spent nuclear fuel, high-level radioactive waste that has the lowest quantity amount being shipped. And I believe as of right now, there's not much actual shipments going on of spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. But then we flip it upside down, and this is kind of shows the interest level that these types of waste attract and, from the general public, as well as the attention they receive in government circles, as well as the radiation levels and the kind of danger levels of the different types of waste. There are requirements that have to do with shipments of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste that low-level waste and perhaps true-level waste don't have to deal with. Requirements and regulations from the Department of Energy, U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, several DOE orders that must be considered, as well as federal, congressional, state, and tribal laws, rules, and regulations all must be considered. And then there's also a greater number of people involved with these shipments of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. So that's a just very quick what's what. Now I want to get into who's who. And during this who's who section, we'll cover the project itself, the committee that oversees the project, the committee that we are meeting today for, the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, and then the 3 Department of Energy offices that we work with and serve as our source of funding. So the Midwestern Radioactive Materials Transportation Project is a joint project between the Council of State Governments Midwestern office and the U.S. Department of Energy. It was started in 1989, and from its beginning until just a few months ago, it was led by Lisa Hanairo. So I appreciate everybody being nice to me since it's my first year running the program. I'll do my best. Lisa set a very high standard, a high bar that I hope we can continue to reach. And the project helps state governments in the Midwest learn about and provide input into the DOE's plans for shipping radioactive materials throughout the region. Now focusing on the committee itself, this was formed just 1 year after the original projects were launched in 1990. It originally focused on future shipments planned by the DOE Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management, I believe that was the organization that was stood up to kind of plan for the eventual shipments to Yucca Mountain when that was still the policy of the federal government. Since 1998, the MRMTC has also worked with the DOE Office of Environmental Management on waste shipments related to cleanup of facilities used during the Cold War era for researching and manufacturing nuclear weapons. We'll be hearing an update from the DOE EM Office of Packaging and Transportation from Ellen Edge later today. The MRMTC also works closely with the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy on planning for an integrated waste management system to transport, store, and dispose of commercial spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. And we'll be getting an update from the Office of Nuclear Energy from Erica Bickford later today on events and developments in the last year. The committee is made up of up to 24 members representing 12 Midwestern states. You can see those states, I don't need to list them all. But 12 seats are made up for executive agency officials who are appointed directly by the governors of those states. And then up to 12 seats are reserved for legislators appointed by the chair of the Midwestern Legislative Conference. And we'll get into those appointments and who's made up the committee in a little bit. And usually the committee meets twice a year in the spring and fall, with the meetings lasting 1 to 2 days. Obviously, and I believe this will be our third virtual session. COVID had a major impact on this, but we're trying to keep up and get together still through these virtual sessions. Fall meetings are usually held in a rotation of our Midwestern state members, and spring meetings are generally held in conjunction with the annual meeting of the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum. For future meetings and past meetings, for those who know, CSG Midwest will reimburse travel for all committee members to these meetings and special guests. So here's the current MRMTC roster. Our current co-chairs are Tiffany Drake from Missouri, who is in her second year, and Michael Snee from Ohio, who's in his first year. We'll get into the rotation of how these co-chair positions work in a second. Something you might see new on this committee member list is the inclusion of some legislative members. I know Representative Mark Schreiber from Kansas has joined us today. We also have Senator Dale Patton and Representative Dan Ruby from North Dakota, Representative Pat Garofalo and Senator Mike Goggin from Minnesota, and Senator Suzanne Geist from Nebraska. So it's been a while since we've had legislative members on this committee, but we're really hoping to continue to build this relationship between the MRMTC and legislators throughout the Midwest. This is a chart of the leadership of the committee going back to 1992. You'll probably see a lot of familiar names if you've been around for a while. The first chair was elected in 1992. That was Harold Borkert, sorry if I don't know that name, from Nebraska. In 1994, the committee began electing vice chairs to succeed the chair, with each position having a 2-year term. And then in 2008, the leadership structure was changed so that there would be a senior and a junior co-chair position that served 2-year staggered terms, with the junior co-chair becoming the senior co-chair after their first year of service. Yeah, that's our. And then want to get into a meeting rotation. This is kind of the idea of how we choose where meetings will be held each year. Committee rotates its meetings around the region to give each state a chance to serve as host. And the current plan, like I mentioned, is to hold the spring meeting in conjunction with the NTSF, and that location rotates among the 4 regions. As you can see, if you're forward looking, the next fall meeting should be in Illinois. We will discuss that towards the end of this meeting on deciding a final location and some dates. Next year, this time in spring of 2022, we'll be meeting in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania as part of the NTSF. And then in the fall of 2022, we'll be looking to hold our meeting in North Dakota or South Dakota. The way the MRMTC works in between and interim between these committee meetings is through our working groups and our work groups. There are currently 2 work groups that have been meeting since our last meeting. The Regional Tribal Engagement Work Group is a standing committee that's been around for a few years now. And the purpose of this is to collaborate with the Tribal Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee on outreach to tribes in the Midwest. We participate in conference calls and webinars, provide guidance to state employees and agencies on how they can increase their collaboration and communication with tribes in the region. And then there's the Planning Guide Review Work Group. This happens every odd numbered year. We take a look at our, I'd say, most important document, the Planning Guide for Shipments of Radioactive Material through the Midwestern states, and assess if any recommendations needed to be changed in that document because of changes or just different circumstances in the last 2 years. We'll be talking about if we want to stand up any committees for this next fiscal year later in the meeting. So just for your reference, some past working groups have included the Regional Outreach Group. That's more regional outreach to legislators. We developed a decommissioning guide for states going through the early decommissioning of nuclear power plants a few years ago. And we developed a brochure checklist for states as they go through that process and what they should consider. And then if you were in attendance at the fall 2019 meeting, you know we had a transportation tabletop workshop to go through the hypothetical shipment of spent nuclear fuel from Big Rock Point in northern Michigan through the Midwestern states to a location in the southwestern US. We strove for that workshop to be a step-by-step interactive event that focuses on spent nuclear fuel once it is in commerce. And after that, a very successful initial tabletop, there's discussions about having another one to include some different states and getting some more input from states that weren't necessarily involved in that first one. Here's some of the publications and resources that the committee has put out recently. Just earlier this year, we finally published the Transportation Institutional Issues Archive, the post-Yucca Mountain years. This is an all-encompassing archive of the topic, issue, debate, what have you, about the shipment of spent nuclear fuel, commercial spent nuclear fuel. It's a great document if you kind of want to learn the history of this policy area. It's mostly written by Lisa Hanairo, who, you know, over the course of her 30-year career became an expert in the area. So it's a great document. Then we have the planning guide, which is more technical and kind of gives shippers a step-by-step process of what they need to consider as they plan shipments of radioactive material through the Midwest. Our monthly e-newsletter is designed to keep readers up to date on what happens each month with our committee, with the NTSF, and just news around the nuclear energy industry in general. And the decommissioning brochure I've already discussed. Want to do a quick overview of the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, or NTSF. And this is how the US DOE communicates with tribes and states about their shipments of radioactive materials. There's a big annual meeting once a year, and the members of the NTSF, besides the DOE, US Department of Energy, is the MRMTC in the Midwest, the Northeast High-Level Radioactive Waste Transportation Task Force in the Northeast, which is staffed by CSG East. The Southern State Energy Board has 2 committees in the South that deal with this. In the West, there's the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant Transportation Advisory Group, otherwise known as WIPTAG, and the High Level Radioactive Waste Committee. Those are staffed by the Western Interstate Energy Board. And finally, the Tribal Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee, or TRMTEC, currently staffed by the National Conference of State Legislatures. And here's a map showing the different regions and what committees work in each area. Want to do a quick overview of the 3 DOE offices we work with. The Office of Environmental Management's mission is to address the nation's Cold War environmental legacy resulting from 5 decades of nuclear weapons production and government-sponsored nuclear energy research. There are shipments currently happening through the Office of Environmental Management, and there's several different topics that this office focuses on and works with the Midwest on. Then we have the Office of Nuclear Energy. They deal with spent nuclear fuel and waste disposition, and their mission is to develop an integrated waste management system to transport, store, and dispose of our nation's spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste. There are not any shipments currently being undertaken by the Office of Nuclear Energy, but we're always forward-looking and planning for those eventual shipments. And then finally, we work with the DOE Carlsbad Field Office, who provides safe, compliant, and efficient characterization, transportation, and disposal of defense-related transuranic or true waste. That all goes to the waste isolation pilot plant in southeastern New Mexico. There are current shipments occurring. It's been a little while since shipments came through the Midwest, but when they do come through the Midwest, it usually leaves the Argonne National Laboratory in the Chicago area, goes through Illinois, Iowa, and Nebraska on its way out west. Why it matters, just show you all the different routes and shipments going through our region. These are all the shipping routes that the Department of Energy Environmental Management undertakes. This map might be a little dated, so take that with a grain of salt, but as you can see, there's plenty of shipments going through Ohio and Indiana and Illinois and all through our region. These are the WIP shipping routes. I think it is not controversial to say that WIP is a model of shipping radioactive waste throughout the country, and they've been doing a great job of the safe transportation of radioactive material for many, many years. And these are the dedicated routes that those shipments take. This is a map of the typical naval spent fuel shipping routes. These are, spent nuclear fuel from the nuclear submarines and other ships in our naval fleet. Generally go by rail from the East Coast and traverse through many routes through our region on its way to the Idaho National Laboratory. And this is when Yucca Mountain was going to be the repository of spent nuclear fuel. There was some planning done by CSG Midwest and the MRMTC, some preferred routes that from the commercial nuclear power plants. As you can see, there's a lot of power plants in Illinois and Michigan and in our region. So when shipments of spent nuclear fuel do occur, we will be seeing a lot of shipments coming through our region. And why it matters to have this committee and the other committees and the NTSF as a whole is to establish policy, develop transportation plans, have emergency planning and preparedness, training and exercises for our local first responders, inspecting and escorting and monitoring shipments as they come through the jurisdictions that we are all responsible for, as well as some public outreach through the media, through constituents and things like that. So that's a very quick newcomers orientation for those who are new to our committee. Are there any questions that I can address? All right, sounds like no. So we'll move on to the report from the co-chairs.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. We're already running a little bit behind time, so I'm not going to cover some of these topics too specifically, just because Mitch has already touched on them and we're going to discuss them further. But a few things I wanted to mention about the past 6 months and kind of what's been going on. Of course, one of those has been the retirement of Lisa. She was kind of the program director and steered this ship for an extended period of time, and we'll definitely miss her. But Mitch has been doing a great job and moving up into that position and taking on that role. We were able to, as Mitch already mentioned, publish the Transportation Issues Archive that I mentioned as part of one of the things that we as a committee were able to do, that was stay active during the pandemic. A number of members, as well as Lisa, presented at a variety of different symposiums and conferences. For example, Lisa presented at the New Mexico Spent Fuel Transportation Symposium, which I actually participated in as a participant. That was a really interesting opportunity to hear kind of what they were looking at as a spent fuel, discussion and kind of bringing in private industry. I also presented at the Waste Management Symposium, which was also online. Kelly Horn presented at the Used Fuel Management Conference, and finally Greg presented at the CRCPD conference. We also had a number of NTSF virtual events since we were unable to come together and gather for our national meeting. Something that I haven't had a chance to go out and check out, but something else that's also gotten accomplished in the past few months has been the new Midwest website, as well as the MRMTC pages. So if you've had a chance or haven't, you might want to go out and check those out. Two things that we're going to hear more about during this meeting today is work on with the Regional Tribal Engagement Committee and some of the stuff that they've been active in, including a new member to the MRMTC or the TrimTech group that was made aware of it by Greg. So that tribe has now joined that particular organization. And as Mitch already mentioned, we are working on the biennial edits for the planning guide. And we're gonna cover that again here in a little bit. So I will hand it over to Mitch for some project updates, and then we'll move on to committee business.
Thanks, Tiffany, and sorry I ran a little bit over on the orientation. I'll do my best to keep this project update short. CSG Midwest has received new funding for FY21 from the DOE Office of Packaging and Transportation. We will submit a continuation application with the Carlsbad Field Office by the end of this month to continue funding. And finally, our cooperative agreement with the Office of Nuclear Energy is coming to an end on September 30th of this year, but we will be working this summer to submit a renewal request application by that September 30th deadline. The funding received or expected will be sufficient to cover all regular project activities and staffing of the committee work groups. In addition, a limited amount of travel funding is available to committee members for when we start to go back to in-person meetings. We'll also hopefully cover some transportation costs for those involved in the regional tribal engagement work, as well as state rail safety personnel for the NTSF rail routing ad hoc working group. As Tiffany mentioned, Lisa Hanairo retired from CSG Midwest in February 2021. And I have taken over as the program manager, and we are hoping to hire a part-time policy analyst to assist with this project in the coming weeks or months. And we'll be making those introductions and welcomes at that time. As far as appointments for the committee, we are currently awaiting gubernatorial appointments from Indiana, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. I've been in touch with those governor's offices, and we should be receiving those appointments soon. And just last month, the chair of the Midwestern Legislative Conference, South Dakota Senator Gary Kamak, made 6 legislative appointments to the MRMTC. I mentioned those in the newcomers orientation, but we welcome them to the committee. As far as the committee work groups, those will be covered in more detail by the members of the work group, so I won't get into that. Do want to mention some things involving the NTSF. The Midwestern Committee is as active in the NTSF as we can be, and the following NTSF related groups have been active since our fall committee meeting. For the NTSF Planning Committee, Mike Snee of Ohio and James Roshilla of Nebraska are the Midwest state representatives. And just like 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic canceled the in-person 2021 annual meeting, which was scheduled to take place in Dallas, Texas. The Planning Committee quickly pivoted and has already put on 2 virtual meeting webinars. 4 more virtual meetings and webinars are planned for the rest of the summer. And the 2022 annual meeting will be held June 6th through 9th, 2022 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as I mentioned. The Rail Routing Issues Ad Hoc Working Group. This ad hoc working group is reviewing the Federal Railroad Administration's revised Safety Compliance Oversight Plan, otherwise known as SCOP, and providing comments, as well as working on the development of the proposed reciprocal rail car safety inspection protocol. The group has met once since our last project update on February 22nd, and the next meeting will be in late June or early July. The representatives from the Midwest on that committee are Brian Vera Cruz from Illinois, Jamie Reyes from Nebraska, Kelly Horn also from Illinois, Tom Forbes, and Tom Forbes from Ohio. As far as webinars go, the CSG Midwest has hosted and will host all 6 of the 2021 NTSF virtual meetings that began on May 18th and will end on July 21st. Furthermore, on March 24th, we hosted the Type B Packaging Certification Requirements webinar, and recordings of all these webinars are on the NTSF wiki site and will be on the new NTSF site that we might learn about later, or right now. Recently, Wikidot, the company that hosts our wiki site, unexpectedly changed their subscription levels and no longer allow people to be added to the site. So after weeks of failed outreach to the company, looking for an explanation, we made the decision to explore other options. So a work group consisting of myself, Erica Bickford, and Ellen Edge, and Tansy Moore began looking for other options. We decided to create a Google site, and we started to populate the content on there. And pending final DOE approval, we should launch that site in the coming month or 2. On December 15th, the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy Transportation Core Group held a virtual meeting. Despite not being able to meet in person, this meeting was worthwhile because it presented the states and tribes with an opportunity to learn about various programs and projects and where they stand. During that meeting, we talked about FY21 appropriations, the presidential administration transition, Atlas and Fortis railcar development, and things like that. There will be another virtual meeting of the Transportation Core Group in June or July, and the members from this committee on that core group are the co-chairs, Tiffany Drake and Michael Snee, and myself. In talking about the waste isolation pilot plant quickly, in the most recent semi-annual notification to the states, the Carlsbad field office indicated that up to 4 shipments of true waste will go from Argonne National Lab to WIP between now and January 2022. But as of the most recent 8-week rolling schedule summary, no shipments have taken place so far. So those 4 expected shipments should take place, I guess, in the next 6 months. Some information and communication. We've already covered the Transportation Issues Archive. There is a link to that document on our website, so please check that out. The legislative tracker, I've not yet been able to create the 2021-22 tracker on state and federal legislation related to nuclear energy and radioactive waste. Hoping that that can be a project for the part-time policy analyst when they are hired. And the monthly newsletters are continuing to be distributed every month on the first Thursday of the month. And finally, as has been mentioned before, the committee has a new website that accompanied the launch of CSG Midwest's new website. It's mobile friendly, much easier to update, and I think a huge improvement. So if you haven't checked that out yet, please do so. And that is the project update.
All right, thank you, Mitch. Next, we're covering just the committee business. One of the things I wanted to cover is, as Mitch mentioned, there have already been some of the NTSF virtual meeting webinars to cover various topics that would normally be held at the conference. And there's some more coming up. The first one is actually later this week on June 17th, and it is the Vermont Yankee Rad Waste Canister Shipment Campaign. Actually, that is going through Missouri, so we've been somewhat involved in that. June 29th is going to be a day in the life of a WIP shipment, which also should be interesting. And perhaps we might hear more about that here later during other reports. On July 8th, there is another NTSF annual meeting event, and that is going to be the Nuclear Power Plant Site Evaluation Status Report. And then July 19th, a little bit different, is there was an invitation sent out for this. So if you haven't received one or are interested in it, definitely reach out to Mitch. This one is called the World Nuclear Transportation Institute and Nutranster International Spent Fuel Experience, information sharing of lessons learned and best practices. This one is going to be a discussion with those that have handled international shipments, especially over in Europe, of nuclear waste, and providing kind of their perspectives and experiences for those of us here in the States that might be getting to step into that more than we have in the past. Myself and Mike and Mitch have been on a number of calls with the organizers of this event to try and help them make it as tailored as they can to the interests of those of us in the United States. And Mike Snee will actually be introducing that workshop. Finally, on July 21st, there is the last of the NTSF annual meeting virtual events. And this one will be regarding NRC Aging Management Program for dry cask storage and the Transportation Regulatory Readiness Review Project. So those are all coming up. If you are interested in getting involved in registering for any of those, please contact Mitch after the meeting and he can hook you up with the information for that. Next, I'll hand it off to Mike.
Thanks, Tiffany. As was indicated earlier by Tiffany, we're reaching out to the members and anybody else on the call actually for ideas for the upcoming year, whether it's like a tabletop exercise along the lines of what was done in when we met in Indianapolis, which seems like years and years ago when we met in person, or a webinar idea, or just a topic that you think you'd like to get more information on, or that the committee needs more information on. That's the kind of ideas we're looking for. If anybody has those ideas, feel free to indicate that now, or of course you could always send an email to Mitch if something comes up that we can explore and look at in the next coming year. So if anybody has any ideas off the top of your head or something that you've been thinking of or want to explore further, then please chime in. Or write an email to Mitch. Well, we've got a message from Greg Gother. He has two ideas, thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pipe up if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
Where's my on-camera button? There we go. So two things I thought of. Yes, to a potential tabletop. Perhaps we explore more of the ins and outs of a private shipment instead of a DOE shipment, as our last tabletop did. And secondly, we're one of the states that's emerging with rad drone technology. I'm wondering if there are applications in shipping for this as well. So those are the two things that popped into my mind.
Yeah, the use of drone technology to monitor radiation is something that has been discussed on meetings in the past, and I think that could be a very good webinar. That
yeah, we actually just managed to get a grant.
Yeah. So if even if the NTSF maybe doesn't want to do something on that, we could do something as a committee. And yeah, I think that is a good idea to follow up on the tabletop with the second tabletop, get some different states involved. There is, a bit of work that needs to be done before that in order to develop a scenario and make sure that all the proper people are involved. So we would need to stand up a work group in order to do that. I don't know if we want to take volunteers for tabletop planning for the fall meeting, or if we want to do that offline. But if you're interested and you want to be involved, you can either speak up now or reach out to me afterwards. Thank you, Greg, for those ideas. Anybody else? I guess one thing I want to mention is I don't know how deep we can get into a tabletop that only focuses on a private shipment. Since our funding is provided by the Department of Energy, it needs to be a Department of Energy kind of related event. What we did last time could work again, where we discuss the steps and compare and contrast. This is what would happen at this stage with a DOE shipment. here's what would or would not happen at the same stage with the private shipment. Just so as long as we keep that in mind, I think these tabletops can continue to go forward. Yeah.
I was gonna say, Mitch, did you see Greg's comment? I just want to make sure you saw it.
Typo, I meant to say fine.
Yeah, I did see that. Okay. So yeah, I'll start organizing that and reach out to people via email. Does anybody have a suggestion of an origin site? Last time we went with Big Rock Point. I think because that is been a decommissioned site for the longest time, and also involved a lot of states in the route: Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Kansas. Perhaps we can maybe look at some Western states in our region to get them involved, but if you don't have any suggestions right now, like I said, we can talk via email. All right, Tiffany, do you want to move on to the next topic?
So our next topic, as we sit here right now in Missouri in the 90 degrees marks, we're going to talk about the fall meeting, which will be Chicago in November, which just sounds so lovely. Thanks, Mitch. So we're looking for some committee input on, a couple of dates that might work in early to mid-November for those that will be coming to the meeting. So, the first question we have is, we don't really do it on a Tuesday, Wednesday for travel, or a Wednesday, Thursday, so that, it's more in the middle of the week. Some suggested dates that Mitch has included in my lovely notes include November 2nd and 3rd, November 9th and 10th. However, I will note that the 11th is Veterans Day, and so some states may be off that day, as well as federal holiday, or November 16th to 17th. As we've already discussed, it will be likely held in Illinois, in the Chicago area. There's also the question of whether committee members would prefer it to be held in the suburbs, possibly near like the CSG Midwest office, or would we prefer downtown Chicago? And Mitch would like us to kind of get some feedback today so he can start looking for hotels. So does anybody have any input on dates or dates that won't work based on other conflicts?
Hi guys, sorry I was late for the meeting here. I had a schedule conflict, but something to consider is that FEMA Region 5 has their used to be called the scheduling conference. Now it's training and emergency preparedness workshop, usually in November, in downtown Chicago, traditionally. So I'm not sure what those exact dates are yet. I don't think we've seen them yet, but that might be a conflict we have to think about.
Thanks, Paul. Could you repeat the name of that full conference?
FEMA Region 5 Training and Emergency Preparedness Workshop. Somebody at FEMA 5 might have some proposed dates already, but I have not seen them yet.
Okay.
I'd be willing to bet that that's probably sometime the week of the 15th. That's usually around when they do that.
Don't know yet for sure.
That's my best guess.
The other thing that would impact possibly me is State and Tribal Working Group is part of the intergovernmental group that's usually held sometime in November. I don't know that they're actually having a Stigwig state meeting that I'm missing right now, but so I'm not sure what they're looking at, but usually that is held in like New Orleans or Nashville, and it's right around the 3rd week of November, but I haven't seen dates on that yet.
Okay.
I can reach out and get back to you, Mitch. I just don't know even if they're that far planned.
Appreciate that.
And Mitch, for the 3rd through the 5th, I believe it is, the National Conference of State Legislators. I don't know how many legislators are on now. That's when they have their annual meeting down in Florida.
Okay, thank you. That's something to consider, absolutely.
Do we want to consider maybe the last week of November or very early December?
That we could do that. It's cold in Chicago no matter what time you go in November.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be much different.
Probably want to avoid Thanksgiving.
Would be good.
Yep.
So-
I'm looking back to 2019, the rep scheduling conference in 2019 was the first week of November, the 6th through the 8th. And now I don't know if they'll try to keep the same time frame just for some historical reference.
All right, so maybe November 30th, December 1st. Hearing a lot of conflicts in early November and mid-November. But let me know, does the November 30th, December 1st work for everyone?
Works for me.
Should work.
Okay. And then the question of downtown Chicago versus suburbs. You know, that's just really a preference thing that I kind of want to gauge your guys' interest in. Suburbs might be a little cheaper, but you know, the evening activities might not be as fun. It's pretty much similar, you know, ease of transportation. It's easy to get around Chicago once you're here. So any thoughts on that?
I tend to like downtown myself, but doesn't really matter.
Same. I like the Drake Hotel myself. That's a nice place.
I'd vote.
Get a room there, Greg.
I've got a story, but I don't know if we have time for me to share it right now.
All right. Sounds good. So I will start looking into downtown
I'll type it
Chicago.
in the chat. There we go.
There you go. I'll start looking into downtown Chicago, November 30th, December 1st for the fall meeting of the MRMTC. And I'll include that information in the follow-up email to this meeting, just so everybody can put a rough placeholder on their calendar. So appreciate everybody's input. Thank you very much.
Next, we have the DOE report starting, and first up is Erica Bickford. So Erica, I already checked, I know you're on, so just don't forget to unmute yourself like I did.
All right, thanks. Mitch, do you have my slides or do you want me to present? Oh, you have my slides, great.
Yeah.
All right, hi everybody. Thanks so much for the invitation to present. It's nice to see all your faces. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what's going on in the Office of Nuclear Energy's Office of Integrated Waste Management. We do have some things afoot. So please go to the next slide, Mitch. Here's our standard disclaimer. We can move on. You can read that on your own time. All right, so here's kind of the agenda of the overviews that I'm going to give. What we're looking at in fiscal year 21 based on where we landed with appropriations, some recent work products for your awareness, what's going on with the railcar developments, and what's called the ISSMS, which is the Integrated Security Safety Management System. State and tribal engagement, some other activities, including knowledge management, some new work that I'm going to tell you about, and then a plug for a presentation on the NTSF annual meeting series. Next slide, please. All right, so I did share this with Mitch back in January, but just to refresh your memories, in the FY21 congressional appropriations language, for the first time in 10 years, Congress appropriated funds from the Nuclear Waste Fund. So this was like, it's not a huge change, but it's a decent change from what we've been seeing the last couple of years. And so funds were appropriated specifically for nuclear waste disposal. Copied here is the language that was specifically for it. It was $27.5 million with 7.5 coming from the waste fund. And then associated with that, there was appropriations report language that talks specifically about integrated waste management systems, which is how Congress refers to our program, the Office of Integrated Waste Management. It's referred to slightly differently in different locations, but it all refers to us. And this was a specific language that was included for us. Continue site preparation activities at stranded sites. This is the congressional language that really means shut down sites in our parlance. So nuclear power plants that have completely shut down. To evaluate the reinitiation of regional transport, which we take to mean, continue working with states and tribes, because otherwise we're not quite sure what the regional part of that is. And then general transportation coordination efforts. So that's all very much in line with the work that we have been doing. There was this other language included in there noting that spent nuclear fuel is located near cities and or Indian reservations, and to be aware of that in our planning. So duly noted. And that was more or less in line with the types of activities we have been doing. Next slide, please. So some of the other updates, as you may be aware, Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who's a former governor of Michigan, was sworn in as Secretary of Energy back in February. As the Deputy Secretary, David Turk, was sworn in March. We have not yet gotten an Assistant Secretary nominations for Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy. However, an update since I created these slides is that Dr. Katie Huff, who's a former professor from the University of Illinois, was hired on to our office as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy and is now the acting Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy as well. So we do have a political appointee from the incoming administration that's having her in the office is starting to get things moving. So in the meantime, we continue to work on a lot of our existing transportation projects consistent with the congressional direction that we received. We have started to get some new direction. I'm going to talk about that in a later slide. And we expect that to kind of continue to build, especially after we get an actual assistant secretary nominated and confirmed, because then you have a lot more management to make those kinds of decisions that otherwise have to be kind of brought up to the secretarial level. So things are starting to move forward, and will continue to do so as more of those Senate confirmed positions start to get filled. Next slide. Some of our recent work products I want to highlight for you. Back in April, an update to our report that looks at the transportation infrastructure on site and near site of nuclear power plants has been released. This used to be the shutdown sites report. We've rebranded it both to update for consistent use of the term spent nuclear fuel versus the old report used nuclear fuel, and we're trying to be more consistent. And then also because we had been directed to not only focus on shutdown sites, but also to focus on operating sites. We are waiting to see from the incoming administration if they want us to return to the Blue Ribbon recommendations, which included a focus on shutdown sites. So it's based on comments that the Secretary has made publicly on following the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission that suggests that we would return to focusing on shutdown sites, but we have not explicitly received that direction yet. So seems like we have a good shot, but more detail to come on that. The latest report includes the site visit information from Oyster Creek and Pilgrim. Oyster Creek was specifically a very interesting and transportation challenge site, just due to all the sort of legacy rail infrastructure being pulled out from the region and having to contend with a lot of overhead clearance issues and prohibitions on hazmat on certain roads, and rail infrastructure that's designed now for passenger infrastructure that may not be able to carry heavy loads and things like that. But you'll be able to learn more about that in the report if you want, or in the upcoming NTSF webinar that Tiffany talked about. Next slide, please. All right, so update on the rail car. We have a number of different things moving forward on the rail cars. The testing of the 12-axle Atlas rail car continues out in Pueblo, Colorado. The testing of the buffer car is complete, and there's a photo on the upper right. That's just the flat deck rail car that separates the cast carrying rail cars from the locomotive and from the rail escort vehicle. So separates sort of the rail cars that contain people from the rail cars that contain radioactive material. So those are just 4-axle, simple flat deck rail cars. The most interesting thing about them is that they have welded plates of ballast on the top to make them heavy enough to work in the train dynamics. So they actually cannot carry any load on them. They're just a spacer rail car. The US Navy has finished their single car testing on their rail escort vehicle, or REV. There's a picture of that in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. Their REV is now going back to the fabricator for the final fitting out of adding bunks and tables and the fixtures in the bathrooms and things like that. The DOE's REV is going to be identical to the Navy's, but I think it's going to be gray instead of blue. That's almost finished. I think we're supposed to receive receive it officially later this month. And then that'll be shipped out to Pueblo, Colorado, so it can be ready for the multi-car testing of the Atlas railcar. For the REV, we're relying on the Navy's testing, doing the single car testing for that railcar, and then we'll do our own multi-car testing in a consist with the Atlas railcar. We also have an 8-axle railcar in development. The design for that was approved by the Association of American Railroads back in January. We're trying to get a request for proposals for the fabrication and testing of a prototype out later this month. It might slip a little bit just due to everything happens slower than you'd like, but that should be coming out shortly. And then I mentioned this in the agenda, we're also working on what's called an Integrated Safety and Security Management System, or ISSMS, which is a cumbersome acronym. But essentially what this is the AAR S2043 standard, which all these rail cars are being built to, requires you have sensors on the rail car equipment to monitor the rail car performance and identify any unexpected changes in the equipment. So it's basically you have these sensors next to certain components, and you have sort of a range that these components are supposed to operate in. It's things like lateral acceleration, ball bearing temperatures, things like that. And if they deviate substantially from the parameters, then it'll send a signal to the rail escort vehicle that something needs to be checked out. And so you have to design both the whole system for the sensors and the communication with the notification system and data recording and all of that. And so we are in the early stages of putting that together. The plan is for it to be integrated and monitored by DOE's existing Transcom system. That's already an existing mechanism for tracking and receiving data from DOE shipments. So that's what we're planning on integrating with. The plan is for the security escorts that are traveling in the rail escort vehicle to be able to monitor the sensors and be notified if there's any issue. And then they'll in turn notify the locomotive engineers if they need to plan to stop for an inspection at the next planned stop, or if there's something more urgent and they need to be able to stop the train for inspection as soon as possible. As I mentioned, it's in the project planning stage, and so this is expected to be completed around 2024. So this is going to take multiple years to get going, but we want this to be ready to go once the rail cars have completed all of their testing, so that we have a full rail transport capability. Next slide. And of course, we continue our intergovernmental engagement activities. As you're aware, we have cooperative agreements with 4 state regional groups and another to support engagement with tribes through the TRMTech committee. Those have been operating on a 5-year cycle of cooperative agreements, and the current cycle ends this year. And so we're planning on setting up a new 5-year cycle to start October 2021. So that's currently in process, and we're of course working with Mitch on that. And we'll ask him to work with you all to propose any specific initiatives, activities, or deliverables that you all want to do. And we are looking at those for the new funding cycle to be increasing the funding a little bit in anticipation of some new work and just due to general sort of increased costs and trying to make sure that we're adequately resourcing our engagement with you all. We have the Transportation Core Group. We last met in December. We were planning to meet in the spring, but set that back a little bit just because there hadn't been much new information coming out of the administration yet. But now we are planning on maybe a late June, early July call with the Transportation Core Group to share some new goings on and just to discuss how some new work or old work will be resumed. So those of you who represent the Transportation Core Group can be on the lookout for that. I've already heard from, I think from all the Midwest members have responded to me on that query on scheduling. For the NTSF, some of these were already touched on. We supported the NTSF webinar on Type B package testing. I continue to participate in the NTSF Planning Committee. We are continuing work with the Railroading Ad Hoc Working Group. Those of you who are in the Railroading Ad Hoc Working Group should see an email from me later today or tomorrow to schedule our next meeting and to see an updated version of the Railcar Safety Inspection Protocol for your review. We got that revised and through all the internal approvals, and that's ready to send out. And then as Mitch mentioned, I've been working with him and Tansy and Ellen Edge on refreshing a new website solution for the NTSF. We were originally focusing on refreshing the wiki site itself, but then due to some other challenges with the wiki site platform, we've come up with a new solution that we hope to officially roll out in the next month or so. And then lastly, not related to specifically DOE, just want to be clear about this. The Department of Homeland Security has set up through their Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council, or CPAC, a working group on private SNF transport. So this would be outside the Department of Energy. However, I was invited to participate as an observer in order to sort of knowledge sharing purposes and just general coordination. So again, DOE is not actively involved in plans for private shipments of spent nuclear fuel, but among the federal staff and in outreach with tribes and states, we are trying to, maintain coordination and communication so that, we're not reinventing the wheel and we're building off of existing shared knowledge. That group is led by DHS, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and FRA. And there is also now a state and tribal sub-working group. So if any of you folks are interested in getting involved in that, I can put you in touch. And next slide, please. One of the other activities we're working on that I wanted to share with you all, this is probably something that you all encounter yourselves, is as you have folks move on to new positions or retire, Lisa certainly is a good example of 30 years of a wealth of knowledge and experience. Walking out the door is certainly hard to step into and keep things moving. So kudos to Mitch on the job that he's doing. But similar to you all and industries everywhere, it's a challenge for the Department of Energy as well, in order to maintain that institutional knowledge and try and hold on to as much information as we can, so we don't have to continue to repeat lessons learned or work that's already been done. It's particularly difficult in nuclear. This is globally in many nuclear facets, just because there's a fewer number of younger people also entering the field. So it makes it more challenging. So we've started to focus on this. We've done a lot of knowledge management activities more on an ad hoc basis in the past. So our site visits are an example of a knowledge management activity, and we were doing those kind of on an ad hoc basis. And now we're trying to be more strategic about it and developing a specific project plan. And it will include, a variety of activities, but trying to come up with, methods for, preserving documents. We have official document records management systems, but there's a lot of, informational items that may not qualify as official records that we still want to maintain access to. So sorting through those, Lisa actually shipped me a couple boxes last summer of documents from her collection. So making sure that we have digital copies of all of those, or scanning them in if we don't, things like that. Just trying to find as much that's already out there as we can and keep it, put it into some kind of clear organizational structure so that we can readily access it when we need to. And then just in general, trying to retain as much past information as we can. Obviously, there are past programs that are not exactly like ours, but there's certainly a lot of valuable information, lessons learned. Mitch mentioned WIP as sort of the model example of the transportation program. So there's that, and there's certainly aspects of other past DOE programs that we can certainly find value in. So that's kind of one of the new initiatives that we've started up as well. Next slide, Mitch. All right, so the new work, save the kind of best for last, or not quite, but so consent-based citing. We have been directed by the incoming administration to resume work on consent-based citing to identify a storage facility to store spent nuclear fuel. So this would be focused on interim storage, consistent with the congressional language that we've got. On a planning basis, we of course understand that anything to move forward on interim storage, you also need to have a clear plan for eventual disposal, so that interim storage doesn't come de facto, long-term storage or disposal. But since the congressional language specified interim storage only at this point, that's kind of what we're focused on for the time being as we develop our communication strategy and try and get more clarity from the administration. In the meantime, we've been directed to resume this program, specifically looking at the 2017 draft consent-based siting process. That was put out early in 2017 at the tail end of the Obama administration. It was put out for a public comment period, but that was simultaneous with a change in administration. And so we may not have gotten as much attention and focus as we otherwise would have under different conditions. So we're now revisiting the public comments that were brought in and doing some analysis on those. And we'll be developing mechanisms to seek additional input as well as developing communication strategies, web content, and other things. That's all in process. It's just really getting going right now. So there's going to be additional information to come on that as we get things figured out on our end. But I wanted to share that with you all because I think there might be some public information coming out about that soon. And obviously for many years, we've all been, wondering and waiting to see what the next step in the spent nuclear fuel management approach from the department is. So this is what we're working with right now. And we of course intend to keep you all informed as new information is available. Next slide, please. Yes, and last but not least, I couldn't end without putting in a plug for Steve Maharis's NTSF webinar series. That's going to be Thursday, July 8th. He's going to focus on the nuclear power plant site evaluations. Again, this was work formerly known as the shutdown site evaluations. He's tailoring this to be for folks who don't have experience with this topic before. It'll be an overview as well as sort of highlights. So if you haven't kept up with this, or it's been several years since you've heard about this work, it's a good opportunity to learn about it for the first time or refresh your memory and hear about some of the additional information we've been collecting through the recent site visits. Of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the 4 site visits that we were hoping to do last year did not happen. We did do a virtual site visit, which CSG Midwest, Mitch and Lisa supported. We did that for the Morris site in Illinois. We found it was interesting, and it was, had some value, especially because the drone pilot, speaking to Greg Gothard's comment about drones, the drone pilot from the Dresden site across the street offered to fly his drone around to look at the transportation infrastructure for the rails and waterways and things like that. And so that made it extremely helpful. However, in the end, we determined it was not as valuable as a boots on the ground in-person site visit. So we'll certainly plan to do a supplemental in-person site visit when we go and do the Dresden site because they're so close to one another. So we do plan to resume in-person site visits really just as soon as we get the go-ahead for federal staff to be able to travel again, which we have not yet gotten. So it could happen as early as this fall, but it might get put up until next spring, depending on when we get the go-ahead, because it does take several months to organize and plan these site visits. So that's all I have for kind of the transportation related work from the Office of Nuclear Energy. And if we have time, I'm happy to take questions, but I don't want to hold up your schedule.
Mitch, do we have time, or do we just want to move on to Ellen?
I don't want to ignore any questions if people have them, but I don't see any hands raised or anything in the chat.
Yeah, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and I can address them in the chat as well so that we can move on to the next presenter. Or you're welcome to email me if you think of something later as well. Happy to answer questions offline.
Thank you.
Thanks
Erica.
again for the opportunity to present.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. We appreciate the updates as always.
You bet.
All right, so next we will have Ellen Edge from the Office of Packaging and Transportation to cover her topics. Give us an update.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate you all having me here today. I will catch you up a little bit on time, I think, because as usual, my office, the Office of Packaging and Transportation, if you don't get news, that's actually good news. Most of the things that we cover, we wouldn't want to have any accidents. We wouldn't want to have any incidents that we needed to cover. So much of the material that I've got has been covered previously. We do have our continuing acting EM1, who is Ike White, and his deputy, Todd Schrader, who is continuing to act as EM2. We haven't gotten any significant change in direction ordered by the new secretary, so the new administration hasn't really changed our focus much. we have got a bit of news on the Departmental Materials Transportation and Packaging Management order, DOE Order 460.2, which was last revised in 2004. We've been working on trying to get that revised since 2012. And as many of you that have been around for any significant time are probably aware, we solicited significant input from all the tribes and states for revisions on that. We took the suggestions that were made in 2012, incorporated what we could incorporate in the revision. We went back out with a copy of the revised order for additional comments, which is unprecedented that an order in process like that be shared with states and tribes. But because we had committed to using your input in 2012, we wanted to follow up on that. We've got the order submitted now to the board for review. And with any luck at all, we're hoping that by, say, October, it's finalized and will be released. So that is a long, long road from 2012, but it looks like we're finally going to get a revision in place there. With regards to my transportation emergency preparedness program, we are finally getting back on track a little bit now that we seem to be past the major hump in the pandemic there. We're starting preliminary plans for a full-size exercise sometime in the late fall. We're continuing to do needs assessments for states and tribes as requested and needed. We're starting to schedule in-person classes on a fairly regular basis, taking all sorts of precautions to protect both students and instructors. And then the online modular emergency response radioactive transportation training, the MRT, we're just about ready to go online with an online version of the refresher course. So we wouldn't necessarily have to visit in person in order for people to get a refresher course in the MRT program. And other than that, that is where things are for the Office of Packaging and Transportation. I'll provide you all a more thorough update in the fall if I'm invited and can make it to Chicago. And if anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. Does anybody have any questions for Ellen? And it was nice to see you upright on your, for those of you that were here earlier, Ellen, when she first came on, was upside down. We thought she might be hanging out in Australia. So. All right. I know Bobby is on. I see his phone. So next we will have an update from Bobby St. John regard to the Carlsbad field office and WIP.
Thank you, and let me apologize for not being able to participate more fully, but Zoom is actually one of the blocked platforms here at WIP, so we just get to do the phone call thing. So to date, we've completed over 12,900 shipments since the beginning of WIP in 1999. The status of Panel 8 is nearing completion, which is a good thing. Obviously, we need Panel 8 complete before we complete waste and placement in Panel 7. So it is actually scheduled to be fully completed in early 2022. We are almost done cutting salt. We're getting ready to issue an RFP for a subcontractor to come in and outfit the panel, which is the electricity, alarms, all that kind of stuff that we need to have in place before we actually begin waste and placement. The big one that may start getting some attention, we're hoping not, but it's possible, is we're going to restart one of our 700C fans. I know you guys have heard me discuss this before. We did complete the 4-hour test, and the survey results indicated that we were 5,000 times below the EPA release limits. So it's what we expected, which is a good outcome. We're in the process of preparing for a 5-day test and balance. When I say balance, it's not balancing the fan, it's actually balancing the airflow in the underground. That fan will only be used for mining or bolting or activities not involving waste and placement. anytime we're actually doing waste and placement activities, that fan will be shut down and we will be going through HEPA filtration. The 700C fan is a free exhaust fan, so that fan will not go through HEPA filtration, which is why we won't do in-placement activities while that fan's operational. The good news about the 700 fan, once we get it restarted, is it's going to give us about 94,000 cubic feet of additional airflow per minute through the underground, which is great for us. The underground right now is one of the big limiting factors for us is airflow. So that extra 94,000 is what's going to allow us to do some simultaneous maintenance activities, for example, mining and bolting at the same time. The big project that you guys have heard about for a couple years now and will for a couple more is the safety significant confinement ventilation system. That project is now under a new contractor. The company is the industrial company. They took over just before the first of the year, and they've made some rapid improvements, and they're making great progress on that project right now. The fabrication building's been completed. They've got all the office trailer complex completed, plumbed, electrical. They've moved into them. All the underground utilities have been completed to support that system. So currently they're pouring slab walls and foundations, and the project completion date is now 2025 is when we'll actually turn that fan over to operations and it will become officially part of the WIP ventilation system. The other one is the utility shaft. That shaft actually in some ways goes hand in hand with the SSCVS. That shaft will allow another point of airflow to enter the underground, which will allow us to attach that shaft to the existing underground at WIP. And the plan is that we will at that point mine replacement panels because initially we were going to use the main access drift as a disposal panel. And as you guys are aware, after the events, we've given up a long portion of that mine or of that panel. So we'll mine 2 additional drifts off of the number 5 shaft or the utility shaft. That project right now is on hold. We had public hearings in May. It was a Class 3 permit modification, so it went through public hearings in May. It's currently with the state being reviewed, and we're waiting to hear what the outcome of that is. Right now, we're expecting it to be late this year, November, even December timeframe before we hear anything. We are doing a little bit of work out there. We just last week successfully placed the plenum, which is part of what will supply airflow into that shaft. So there's a very limited amount of work going on at that project right now, pending what we hear from the state. There's a number of other projects that we're having to do at WIP. As many of you are aware, initially WIP was designed to have a 25 to 35 year operating life, beginning in 1999. Many of those structures have been out there since the early 80s. Initially, WIP declared operational readiness in 1988. So for 11 years, it wasn't receiving waste, obviously. But as a result, a lot of the infrastructure out there is in desperate need of repair and or replacement. And so we're doing a lot of that work in preparing for WIP's critical mission, which is to continue to safely place the true waste from around the complex. And I won't go through all the projects, but a few of them are replacing air compressors. We completely remodeled and updated the central monitoring room, which is the brain of the site, if you will. We're running new fiber optic out there to improve communications. We're going to repair and repaint the salt hoist or the head frame. So a lot of projects such as that are just in need of upgrades or replacements. And one thing I will mention, and it was touched on earlier, we did release the projected shipment schedules through January 2022. The 2 main sites for us are going to continue to be Idaho and Los Alamos from a shipping perspective. Through January 2022, Idaho could ship up to 165 shipments, Lannel up to 80, Oak Ridge up to 28, Savannah River up to 18, Lawrence Livermore up to 5, and Argonne up to 4. And then there's the potential that WCS, Waste Control Specialists, as some of you or most of you are probably aware, we still do have some true waste containers in Texas at WCS, which were sent there in 2014 when the event occurred, and they've been there ever since. So we're working with LANL and with the NRC and the state on a path forward to get those waste containers out of WCS and either shipped to WIP for permanent disposal or sent back to LANL if there's the potential need to remediate any of that waste, which is what's being evaluated. So there's the potential that they could ship some this year. Really doesn't impact any of you guys. It actually only impacts about 6 miles of Texas, and then the rest of it's all New Mexico. So, but that's kind of an update from the WIP perspective as far as what's going on here and what's coming up in the near future. The focus is obviously going to remain on the 2 large capital projects up through completion, as they're critical for us to continue to do our mission. I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Yeah, Bobby, I have one question. I know that the low number of shipments from Argonne National Lab last year was due in part to a lack of canisters available to ANL. Is that still the case this year, or is the low number of shipments just due to the low amount of true waste that ANL is producing?
It's a combination, to be honest, Mitch. There's a number of factors that are involved in that. So right now, we're only averaging about 6 shipments a week. We have the goal to ramp up to 10, hopefully by the end of the year. But a lot of that will just depend on airflow and what kind of maintenance we need to get done in the underground. But canisters is one of the big ones. They're expensive, and the availability of them is not really there. So yeah, we just kind of base it on what the site's projection is and what we can accommodate.
Understood. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or anybody unmuting. So if there aren't any other questions for Bobby, thank you for that, Bobby, and we will move on. Next, we have the committee work group reports and the discussions of those. First, it will be Rodney Pitchford from Illinois discussing the planning guide review. So Rodney, don't forget to unmute. And just so everyone knows, I have to leave for a personal reason. I won't be able to make it back before this ends, so Mike's going to be taking over for me. So everybody have a good rest of the meeting, and hopefully we'll see you sooner rather than later. Is Rodney on? There he is. He needs to unmute.
I am. Thanks, Tiffany.
No problem.
Let's see if I can share my screen here. No luck.
We could see the document for a moment. There it is.
There it is. All right.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So thanks again, Tiffany. As Mitch mentioned earlier, the planning guide review working group meets every odd number year. So 2021, we got another working group out there, and the purpose of the group is to review and revise the Part 2 section, the recommended practices of the planning guide for shipments of radioactive materials through the Midwestern states. The group itself this year included Swapan Seha from Kansas, Greg Gossard from Michigan, Paul Schmidt from Wisconsin, myself, and of course Mitch from the CSG Midwest. We had 3 meetings, all via Zoom. We met on January 15th, March 17th, and May 12th. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to, or everyone on the committee anyways, had a chance to look the document over. It's been out there. I think Mitch sent it out a few weeks back. So hope you had a chance to look at it. I'll go through the major changes. We've had a lot of grammatical changes. I'm not going to hit on all of those, but if you see something that you have questions or concerns over, or through your review that you've done, you've got things that you want to bring up, please just let me know. So to start with, right at the very top, over the past couple of reviews of this, we began to include tribes more into the document. Was primarily just states before, and unfortunately it was kind of hit and miss. So we decided we needed to make sure that we take care of that and get the tribes included fully in the document. So instead of stating states and tribes in every instance, we decided to just describe stakeholders as states and tribes, and that's what the note there states. As you can see, the U.S. Constitution recognizes Native American tribes as a distinct government with the same powers to regulate their internal affairs as federal and state governments. Therefore, shippers must consult with and treat tribes affected by shipments of radioactive material in the same way they would states. In this guide, stakeholders should be understood as states and tribes. So we're just going with the term stakeholders instead of writing those both out each time. And then we get down under transportation planning. We've added consolidated interim storage facilities to the list of possible storage locations. And we did that to reflect the possibility of the approval of the two facilities in West Texas and Southeast New Mexico. And then, as you can see, quite a few grammatical changes there. Go down a little bit farther, we have added some titles and subparts, just define those a little bit better, just to make it a little more clear. Most of these other things are just grammatical, nothing major on that page. Page 3, as we discussed modes and route selection, there are 27 factors that rail carriers consider when they're doing a risk analysis, and instead of just referencing the regulations, we decided to make things easier on the shippers that we would just include those within the document. And Kelly Horn actually had a comment on this one that we might have to address. He mentioned that the FRA doesn't actually list these. That's listed by PHMSA. So we might need to make a quick change on that, Mitch. Just, it's up for discussion. If somebody sees it some other way, let me know. But that was one thing he mentioned.
Okay.
Also on page 3, we put any applicable agreements with stakeholders. We added that to include any specific regulatory guidance that individual states might have. Just kind of covering our bases there. There may be agreements that states or tribes have outside of what we have listed in here. So just kind of try to cover that. The next several pages, there wasn't a lot of technical content that was changed, just mostly, well, actually it was just all grammatical over the next several pages. No changes to packages, advanced notification of shipments. Yeah, you can see a lot of red, but most of that is just cleaning up the wording. Let's see. So, not sure where that went too far, sorry. So up here, this was an old link or an old URL, and Mitch is going to go through the entire planning guide and update all of those. So this was just an updated URL that we needed to replace, and there are probably a lot more in there. Mitch will take care of those. Down here under emergency management considerations, we had a couple of changes. We added an identification of associated hazards and potential threats to the list. And we changed instant command system. We added national incident management systems instead as a preferred or default rather instant command system. Let's see. There's a few places in the document that Transcom was listed specifically, and unless it's talking specifically about DOE shipments, which most of the document has now been expanded to include DOE and private shipments. So we've replaced Transcom in most instances with the applicable satellite tracking system instead. Transcom could still be the system, but we're given the option for others to be used as well. And then we removed the 3 paragraphs about Section 180C funding from the assistance for states subheading and made it its own subheading. We did this to reflect the Section 180C only applies to DOE shipments and is distinct from other forms of financial assistance. So we made it its own subheading just to make it a little clearer that that's going to refer only to DOE shipments. And we just moved it down. Really, it's the next subheading in line. And then on page 11, let's see, we added language explaining that a CVSA level 6 inspection procedure for rail shipments is under development by the NTSF rail routing ad hoc working group. Just to point that out, it's not in place yet, but it is in the works. A few more grammatical changes. Another instance there of taking Transcom out and replacing it with satellite tracking systems. And then on this last page, we added February to the month that we are trying to avoid shipping in. Obviously, February through the Midwest can be just as nasty as December and January, so we added that in there as well. And then a few general changes. Mitch is going to add a new appendix listing to the federal statutes and regulations referenced in the planning guide. Just there's a lot of things listed in here that weren't necessarily put into one location. You would have to dig through this section to pull out all of those regulations or statutes. So he's going to place those all in one section just to make it a little more user friendly. And then a big change that's not yet done. On the last read through of the document, it was found out that we probably need to soften the language a little bit. We're going to go back and change will do to should do, or some other form, something similar to that, just to soften it up, because this is going to be done to reflect that we want the planning guide to be useful for all shippers. So this originally was intended for just DOE shipments, so we could put will do in a lot of those situations. But since we've expanded this to include more private shipments, we don't necessarily have the authority to always say will do. So we're going to go back and try to soften that up a little bit. And that's really the extent of the changes that we've made. Are there any questions or concerns over anything that was listed or any of the grammatical changes that you've seen? I know I kind of run through it pretty quick. Well, hearing none, just want to let you know that we're going to go back through, just to reiterate that we will go back through and make one last pass at softening up the language in the document itself. And then it'll go out for DOE approval. Once that's approved, that's assuming that the committee itself approves this. They'll go out for DOE approval, and then once that's done and DOE approves it, Mitch will work on getting it published for the 2021 edition online. So that's all I really have on it. I would send it back to you, Mike, and just going to let everybody know that Mike's going to put this up for a yes or no approval. If there are no questions or concerns, then I'll send it right back to you, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. So if there's no other questions for Rodney or any suggestions, I'm going to make a motion to approve the changes along with change that Rodney mentioned that Kelly Horn suggested. If I can have a second, then we'll vote to accept the changes or not.
This is James. I'll second that.
Thank you. So for the vote, we're going to just type in and reminder that only committee members should be voting. Just type in A or nay into the chat function of the Zoom meeting along with your state.
Mitch, my apologies. I got kicked out and I just was able to get back on again. I think I'm missing a vote.
You are, but you worked on the document, so you know what the changes are.
Okay.
Can I assume
voting
that
on
Wisconsin is an aye? All right, Wisconsin's an aye.
Well, it certainly looks like it passed, Mitch.
I think
I
it
see it
did.
in the chat, yes. So our next working group that we're going to get a report from is the Regional Tribal Engagement Work Group. So Heather, please give the report when you're ready.
Thanks, Mike. First of all, I'd like to thank the Midwest Committee for all that you're doing to include tribes, not only on the Regional Tribal Engagement Working Group, but as some of the items as Rodney mentioned with respect to the planning guide, including tribes. And, you know, that just means a lot in my mind. So let me get on with the report. There have been a couple of meetings of the Regional Tribal Engagement Work Group since the last TrimTech Midwest Committee meeting, one on January 11th and the other on April 12th. Before the fall meeting, the work group established a work plan that included 3 projects for this year, 2021. And with the retirement of Lisa in February, the progress on these projects has slowed down a bit as Mitch has taken on his new responsibilities. He is the leader of the Tribal Engagement Working Group. And as Rodney was talking about with respect to the planning guide, there's a new Appendix E, tribal information, which will be helpful. And it will include information related to campaigns encouraging tribes to opt in to the NRC's advanced notification program, and develop guidance document for Midwest regional committee members on how to establish stronger relationships with tribes bordering their jurisdictions. And the biggest news for the work group since last meeting came from Greg Gothard. In January, he gave a presentation on the Midwest Spent Fuel Transportation Workshop to the Michigan Tribal Environmental Group. And at that meeting, Traven Michaels, the environmental resource specialist for the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, reached out to Greg seeking more information about Michigan, Michigan's work involving radioactive materials transportation, the Midwest Committee, and TrimTech. And working collectively, Mitch, Greg, and Tansy Moore, who's the program leader for TrimTech, provided Traven with more information, and we're glad to hear that the Little Traverse Band is the newest member of TrimTech. And Traven, I know you're on the call. Would you care to add anything to your about your involvement? He might have had to step out, but we sincerely thank him and the Little Traverse Band for their involvement in the Midwestern radioactive material shipment, and as well as their involvement with TrimTech. We certainly hope that other states and region will emulate this kind of outreach in the future. And I know that Tansy is going to be working with the other state regional groups to see if they're interested in doing a similar work group. And as I said at the beginning, we truly appreciate the work of the Midwest in their outreach to the tribes, not only to engage in their meetings, in your meetings, but also to be part of the working group and to be reflected in your planning guide. So thank you for that. I'd be glad to answer any questions that folks might have before I hand the meeting back over to Mike.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Heather? If not, then we're going to move on to do the regional roundtable for each of the states. So we're going to ask that you keep your comments on what's going on in your state to either transportation issues, nuclear power plant issues in your state, or post-COVID activities, returning to work, that sort of thing. So we have two states that Mitch is still waiting on appointments from their governors for committee members. That's Indiana and North Dakota. So we're not going to have reports from them this time, but we're going to move on to the first one is Illinois. Is that you, Rodney? Or are you giving it this year?
Yeah, that'll be me, Mike.
Okay.
Kelly's got another engagement, so this will be pretty quick. Just going to go over some of the shipments that we've seen or tracked through the state, and then talk just a little bit about working with Orano on the rail shipments. But so year to date, 2021, we've had 15 shipments, HRCQ shipments that have been inspected and escorted. It started off really slow throughout the year, but it's definitely picking up now. Spent fuel shipments, we've seen 2. No WIP shipments, has already been discussed. Non-HRCQ category 1 shipments, we've tracked 10 so far this year, one of those being a rail shipment. Total activity inspected and escorted has been about 205,000 terabecquerels. 0 violations found. Low-level shipments reported through our tracking system, or low-level radioactive waste shipments, been 77. And then, like I said, we're still working alongside Orano and working with them to plan for an upcoming HRCQ rail shipment that we will be at least escorting. I don't think we're gonna have the opportunity to inspect, since it's a little more difficult to get them stopped where we need to be to inspect. But they've been extremely helpful and forthcoming with information and questions, and reaching out to us to see what we need, what they can do to help out. So looking forward to that. It's been a long time since we've had one go through Illinois that actually needed to be escorted. So we'll see how that goes. That's really all I have for Illinois at this time.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. Next up is Iowa. Angela, you giving it?
Yes, thank you, Mike. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Still transitioning back to the office here. So I guess that's one of the first updates. We are transitioning back to the office. I think DOT, and Chris, feel free to jump in. They have been back to more normal operations longer than we have, but here at the Public Health Department, management has moved back to the office as of June 1st, and the rest of staff will be coming on July 1st. So we are transitioning back to more normal activities, although we are trying to figure out ways to keep a little bit of the flexibility that's been allowed and proven to work over the last year with the telework posture that we've had. Do you have anything to add on that, Chris?
We're finally almost back up to 100%. We're done doing the COVID escort runs and that sort of stuff. So we're finally back.
Good. Yeah, so that's kind of where we're at there. Duane Arnold Energy Center is exiting their emergency planning requirements on June 21st. So we're almost to the end of that. They've been shut down since August of 2020. They were planning to shut down in October of 2020. However, they were hit with the derecho that came through Iowa in August and knocked down their cooling towers. Because of that, they decided to just stay shut down at that point. And so they've been running through the process of shutting down and exiting their emergency planning requirements. So that will happen. They are entering into safe store. So they are not planning to ship any of their even higher level radioactive waste for many years, decades is what's in their plan. Obviously that can always change, but right now they are hoping to have their spent fuel out of the pool within a couple of years onto the dry cask storage location, and then they're going to sit dormant for it looks like about 40 to 50 years, and then get rid of the rest of the waste. They are demolishing a couple of buildings and getting rid of some of their low level waste that they normally get rid of anyway, to kind of just clean things up for dormancy. And they are turning that site into a solar farm. So it will be providing solar energy instead of energy from radioactive materials. So that's kind of what's going on with Duane Arnold. If anybody has any questions on that, you can let me know, but it shouldn't really be a big impact from transportation at this point anyway that we can expect. And then the last thing that we're working on, we are going to allocate some of our funding this year to try to develop some enduring training for us to be able to use here in Iowa. And obviously, as we get it developed, we can offer it back to the committee members and others. But we're working with Department of Transportation to create some virtual reality type of modules for level 6 inspections, as well as other types of awareness modules to allow people to immerse in more of a realistic scenario, since we don't have radiation, luckily don't have radiation incidents very often. So we're hoping to create 2 to 3 modules ranging from a routine inspection practice all the way to something leaking out of the truck, not necessarily a high level shipment, but even just a regular truck on the road, and then to an actual incident where maybe something has occurred that's requiring a major response. So we are working on finalizing the plans for that. And so we'll give you more updates as that gets developed. Chris, do you have anything else? Well, we've had a couple of highway route control quantity shipments here in the last week or two. And but again, slow with that over this past year, but anticipating that picking up, and we'll be paying attention for those 4 shipments. It sounds like we'll be coming through from Argonne. So we'll pay attention and hopefully have a little heads up on that and get everybody prepped. And Chris, if you have anything else, feel free.
You covered it.
Okay, thanks. That's all for Iowa.
Okay, thank you, Angela and Chris. Moving on, we're gonna go to Kansas.
Well, I think I'm the new guy on the block here. I don't think my other Kansas member is on the call. So I'm State Representative Mark Schreiber. So this is my first meeting and just getting caught up with everything, but it's been quite an interesting discussion because I've worked with the electric utility here in Kansas for 38 years before I retired and became a legislator. 18 of those were at Wolf Creek, our own nuclear power plant. It's a sister to Callaway over in Missouri. And so anyway, interesting discussion, and I'll make contact with the agency person here in Kansas and get kind of caught up. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for having on, Representative.
Okay, so moving on, we're going to go to Michigan. Greg.
All right. Let's see. So, COVID, we're beginning a phased transition back to in-person work, and that's going to begin July 12th. So it's not going to be an all at once, everybody's back on that day. It's going to be, they're still working out all the details, but we still are on track for this. And so it's looking good for our ability to attend in person in the fall. I was going to mention the Little Traverse Bay, but Heather covered it exceptionally well, so I don't need to talk about that at all. Thank you, Heather. So a unique, on the drone side of things, so we are developing our drone programs for RAD, and we have a unique opportunity at a TNORM site that recently declared bankruptcy in northern Michigan and has been remitted to oversight by the state. The site has been characterized via a walkthrough, and we found several readings throughout the site, including a hotspot of around 14 MR per hour. So we've been granted permission to use the site for testing our drone systems with our first planned visit next month. And we were able to secure a grant for $60,000 through FEMA's 2020 HSGP for rad detection UAS. So we're hoping to figure out what we're going to purchase with that that's going to work the best for us. So ongoing testing on that side. And that's all from my side of the house. Waylon is on, I believe, from State Police, Homeland Security. If he wants to share anything, I'll turn it over to you. So I think he was on, there he is.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, nothing much to report. Happy to see everyone's faces today. As Greg mentioned, we're phasing back in. I'm not sure what that's going to look like for Michigan in the long run, but starting in July, we'll be able to return back to the office a little bit. Looking forward to seeing everyone again in the fall, and I think that's it for Michigan.
Okay, thank you. So it doesn't appear that there's anybody on a call, on the meeting from either Minnesota, or we know that Tiffany left from Missouri, but there's a few that just show up as a telephone number. So if either any of those people are from Minnesota or Missouri and are prepared to give a brief update. Apparently not. So we're going to move on then to Nebraska.
Okay, here we are. Well, I got kicked out of my office last week, so I'm in the process of moving, so that's very exciting. Nebraska, we've had a pretty busy couple of months. Our longtime radiation control program manager, Julia Schmidt, retired in December, and they recently appointed a new person to lead that program, Becky Harises. So we're very excited to have her on board with the state, and she's been a longtime inspector in our X-ray and radioactive materials program. So we're very happy to have her on board and working with us in the radiological transportation program. We recently completed the ingestion pathway exercise at Cooper Nuclear Station. We received our preliminary feedback from FEMA, and they were pleased with our work in that. COVID-wise, the state is very much opening back up. Recently, the governor told our administrative services to get everyone back to work unless they were already in a flexible workplace prior to COVID. You know, the pick a cube every day is a different office. So If you're doing that, then they get to stay home, but the rest of us are all back in the office full time. We are beginning to receive requests for training along the WIP corridor and gaining some interest in radioactive materials training, especially. We've been working with our state hazardous materials emergency response teams to get them credentialed under the national qualification system. And they've noticed that they are short in their radiation detection and survey abilities. So we've been getting some requests for training, and we're very excited to be providing that to them in the next year or so. We did lose one of our mutual aid hazmat teams, one of our state emergency response teams. But fortunately, that was basically a suburb of the Omaha metro area. So it's covered by our Omaha hazmat team. And we have our CVSA level 6 inspection refresher coming up. They're hoping that they can actually do that in conjunction with a point of origin inspection. So our inspectors are very excited to have that opportunity again. Other than that, yeah, just trying to get back to normal with our training and planning. So we're hoping that we can really get on the road more and that we'll have some greater response from our departments and our mutual aid associations. And yeah, looking forward to a better 2021. Subject to any questions, that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give the report for Ohio. And first off, Steve Bartnowski, who attended many of these meetings over the past several years, worked for Ohio EMA. He left his position with EMA and presumably to move on to bigger and better things. So Steve will not be participating any further in our committee. And as been the case over the past few meetings for the Ohio update, unfortunately, the big news continues to be the Ohio scandal concerning our nuclear power plants and their bailout that was passed by the Ohio legislature. It's the Davis-Besse plant and the Perry plant. Hospital 6 was the mechanism. And it came out that allegedly there was payouts to Ohio legislators, which led to the arrest and indictment of the Ohio Speaker of the House and 4 of his associates. And since then, since our last meeting, this continues every month. Something new comes out regarding this scandal that makes headlines. So just since our last meeting in November, the FBI executed a search warrant at the home of the Public Utility Commission of Ohio chairman and carried out a number of boxes worth of documents. A few days after that, First Energy, which is the utility owns the power plants, disclosed that they had fired their CEO in part because of a $4.3 million payment to someone who was unnamed, but who became the Ohio regulator over utilities, which is basically the chairman of the Public Utility Commission of Ohio, who then the day after First Energy put that out, he resigned his position. And then a few months after that, headlines came back again because one of the lobbyists, one of the 4 who was indicted along with the Speaker of the House, committed suicide in Florida. So it just keeps going on. And just last week, it was disclosed that American Electric Power, who owns, partly owns the coal-fired power plants that were part of the House Bill 6 that subsidized 2 aging coal power plants, that they have been subpoenaed for records concerning their role, if any, and their benefit from House Bill 6. So this continues on. And now First Energy has entered into discussions with federal regulators to what they call a deferred prosecution agreement, which is something that corporations could get into, where they pay probably a large fine, since a corporation, of course, can't go to jail. So this just continues on. And unfortunately, it made Ohio #1 in something. I believe it was USA Today just came out and said Ohio is the #1 state for corruption. So Yay, we're number one. And that's all I have for Ohio, unless anybody has any questions. Okay, so next up, my screen went dead, so excuse me, will be South Dakota.
No,
It should only take a few minutes.
Hello, everyone. Don't have much to report for South Dakota. We are seeing a few shipments going through, some HRCQ shipments, but it's been pretty quiet. COVID, I guess related is we're all pretty much back to normal. South Dakota never really shut down so much when it comes to COVID, but there were some instances where we were working from home for nearly a year, but we're all back in the offices and getting back to normal, I guess. So pretty short. That's about all I have. So.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to Wisconsin.
I'm not sure if somebody from emergency management is on. If not, I can provide an update unless they're on.
I think it's just you, Paul.
Okay, yeah, I saw the phone numbers. I wasn't sure who they belonged to. So, okay, a couple things then. One is that we're in the process of getting back to more of a normal work schedule here starting July 6th, but it won't be like it used to be. We've all found out that we can work remotely pretty effectively. And so we've been given the option of either going back anywhere from full-time to totally remote or anything in between. But you have to apply for it. Most of us have been approved for a hybrid work model. So most of us will be working part of the week in the office, then maybe 1 or 2 days of the week remotely. So that's going to be what my schedule will be, as well as many other folks. We can go back to doing in-person events now, both in-person trainings out of state, as well as in-person training within the state. So we're starting to do that more. And then next month, we'll start to get into that even more. So that's an improvement there. You should have seen the article in the newsletter about the Kewaunee nuclear power plant. The fact that they're going to dramatically accelerate their decommissioning schedule from basically decades in the future to starting in 2023. They're in the process of transitioning their license over to Energy Solutions. Then in about 1.5 years ballpark, start to actually do active decommissioning at the Kewaunee site. What is significant about that, if you remember, a number of years back, we had an individual from the La Crosse boiling water reactor attend this meeting to talk about their plans for decommissioning of their site and the large number of low-level radioactive waste shipments that was going to generate in the process. Kewaunee is a bigger site, so I suspect they will have even more low-level waste shipments once they start their decommissioning in 2023. So I would suggest that maybe in 1 year or so, we extend an invitation to a representative from the Kewaunee site or Energy Solutions, however that works out, to attend this group's meeting to talk about their plans for waste shipments related to their decommissioning. That's what I have.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So now we're going to move on to our tribal partners. And I know that Heather had to leave. So Travis Michaels, if you have any comments to make for the committee. Okay, Travis, if Travis is not on, I'll move on to Richard Arnold. Richard?
Yes. Hi, Mike. Thanks. I just wanted to kind of echo some of Heather's remarks initially about what you folks are doing with on the regional level. I think are very important, but also your meetings are very important when we're hearing updates on monitoring activities or shipments, because those are useful for those tribes that are in those respective areas and seeing how we can bridge some of those gaps of communication. So we're looking at that as really a model to hopefully replicate and suggest to other groups. Moreover, just to let everybody know, we're going to be holding our fall meeting on tomorrow on the 15th. So it'll be 11 o'clock Central Time. Invitations were sent out, so look forward to participation in that. We're going to at that meeting have some time allotted for the SRGs, state regional groups and the WIP to provide some updates to us as well. And at our meeting, we're going to be also having some discussions with Department of Transportation, actually Federal Railroad Administration and the Tribal Affairs Office within the Department of Transportation about a tribal consultation plan that will be useful probably for everybody, no matter where you're at, if you have any kind of involvement with Department of Transportation. And then equally, we're going to be talking about the Safety Compliance Oversight Plan, the SCOP. So we'll have a little bit of a briefing on that. Further, we're, as Trim Tech, we're revising some of the fact sheets and information that we have. We're looking at expanding our invitation to some other tribes. Some of those are within the Midwest. So specifically, we've talked about bringing in Rosebud and the Pine Ridge reservations in South Dakota. Also, we've had some discussions about Fort Washakie in Wyoming, about some of the shipments there and planned activities in the future. So looking at exploring some of those as options. And then also the Tesuque Pueblo in New Mexico, and bringing them into the mix as well. Moving down, we're also working with the Department of Homeland Security, as Erica has suggested, or provided in her update. And one of the things we're doing there is also serving as observers in that capacity, but making sure that there's not only a tribal voice, but an opportunity to provide input where needed. We're looking at developing some comments to some NRC initiatives. And so we've developed an NRC rulemaking subcommittee along with a marketing and branding committee for expanding what Trim Tech does and providing the information to interested parties. So that about wraps it up. There you have it in a nutshell. Good seeing everybody.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
And we're going to turn it over to Mitch to review any action items that came from the meeting today.
Yeah, just a few quick action items. I will post the meeting materials on the website after this meeting ends over the course of the next week. Work to stand up a transportation workshop group to plan for our transportation workshop at the fall meeting. If anybody wants to volunteer to work on that, I will be soliciting some volunteers, as well as maybe just directly asking people to work on that over the summer. I'll begin the hotel search for our fall meeting for November 30th through December 1st in downtown Chicago. Committee members and other guests, let me know if there's any conflicts that we didn't talk about earlier with that. And please let me know if you have any other project ideas for financial year 2021. We'll also explore a possible webinar or document about the use of drones for radioactive monitoring. And finally, I will finish, the Planning Guide Review Work Group will finish their work and get that Planning Guide 2021 edition published by the end of this summer.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. So we're drawn to an end of what hopefully is our last purely virtual meeting. Hopefully everyone can make it to Chicago end of November. But if something comes up in your state or wherever still has travel restrictions, please let Mitch know as soon as you can. So perhaps some arrangements can be made so that everyone can participate, whether in person or virtually. So with that, unless anybody has any comments or questions to add, we are going to adjourn the meeting. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
For attending.
Take care, all. Good to see you all.
Have a good rest of your week.
Same here.
Yeah. Bye.